Good morning, everyone. Happy Transit Monday. We're going to be talking about the celestial energy forecast for the week. So give me a second to call everybody in. I got good stuff for you today, important stuff for you today. So hang on a second. Okay, well, I feel like this whole year I've started off every transit report with take a deep breath, take a deep breath. So I'm not going to start it any differently this week. so let's dig down here and let's talk a little bit about what's going on, especially what's going on in the month of October when we are playing in Libra energy. And really what we're playing in, if we look at it through the lens of human design, is we're playing in the spleen. We're playing in that self-actualization center, which is a center that is responsible for timing and a center that is responsible for instinct and intuition. And the instinct and the intuition around the timing of the self-actualization center is really all about interpreting the signals that your gut is giving you correctly. And I say correctly because part of what lives in that self-actualization center is fear, right? And when we think about fear, fear has a healthy purpose. When we are faced with an event that threatens our life, like if the bear is coming after you, or you're being chased by someone, that fear signal inside of you is giving you important information, right? It's telling you there's something you need to be taking care of right now, something you need to be paying attention to, because in this moment, your life, your well-being is at risk. That's healthy fear. And we need to know how to really hear that and tune that, to be attuned to that, because that's important information for us to pay attention to. But as human beings, we're a little bit more complex than our animal siblings, right? I would say my dog has fear, especially one of my dogs. One of my dogs is a highly traumatized dog. We got him as a rescue. He has a history of having been beaten and starved. He is 4 now and still a pretty traumatized guy. He's definitely much better than he was when we first got him, but he's scared of things like sticks because he was beaten. So if you pick up a broom, you have to kind of be mindful because he's afraid of sticks. That's trauma fear, which is the second kind of fear that we share with our animal siblings, right? We store old stories. We store the experiences of our old stories in our bodies and in our brains, which are this part of your body, right? And when we encounter events that are similar or feel similarly, let's remember, memory at this level is visceral. It's not cognitive, it's visceral. So we start to have feelings, sensations similar to those that we experienced when we were traumatized. We react with fear. That's PTSD. And when I teach, fear and trauma in my courses and in my trainings, and I talk about fear and trauma, I talk about how we talk about macro trauma. You can go to therapy for macro trauma. You should go to therapy if you've experienced macro trauma. That's any event that's a genuine life-threatening event, or a violence, or some really intense, unexpected event that may have happened to you. But there's also micro trauma, and that's those experiences that we have where we are in some way interpreting what's happening to us as it's not okay or safe for me to be who I am and how I am. And those micro traumatic experiences, they happen to us when we grow up as we're conditioned, right? We inadvertently sometimes have those experiences at the hands of our family and the education system. And the more we internalize it's not okay or safe for me to be who I am and how I am, the more we also have those protective fear patterns that are rooted in trauma. What makes us a little bit different is that we can also have, as human beings, existential fears, right? I'm not good enough. I'm not going to be successful enough. I'm not going to get it right. And those existential fears can be paralyzing. And really this entire month of October, I really want to lovingly and gently say it's normal when we play in this energy in October for us to have to confront face to face some of our deeper, more existential fears. There's a lot of fear that comes up in the month of October because the sun is transiting through all these gates in the spleen center all through this month, and a little bit at the end of last month and a little bit into next month. So we have this sort of curriculum in fear every October, but it's also a curriculum in faith, right? We are learning about how do we cultivate the courage to bust through the paralysis that happens when we experience either existential fears or post-traumatic fears. I also just want to really add one spicy little thing here. Collectively, we're really focused on the idea of PTSD. And that's good. That's a big surge forward from when we weren't looking at that at all. I'm glad we're talking about it. I want to invite us all into realizing or recognizing that if we focus on PTSD and the trauma we've experienced in our lives, we are ending our story in the middle of a chapter. We're not allowing ourselves to progress to the next phase where we get to experience a redemption arc. And that redemption arc is where we go from post-traumatic stress to post-traumatic growth. And I'm bringing this up. Again, this is not an opportunity for us to bypass. It's not bypassing. We don't want to bypass. We absolutely have to look at our trauma. In fact, it's so essential that we know from research that if we have a traumatic experience, if we can get in there and tackle that trauma within 6 months of the experience, we can actually minimize the capacity or minimize our experience of PTSD. Wouldn't it be nice if when we go out into the world to help people who have experienced trauma or disasters, that we not only bring food and water and shelter and safety, but we also bring trauma teams so that we're not raising another generation of people who are navigating the world with trauma stories. That's my dream. That's my dream. For many of us, because we are so focused on the negative, which is kind of how our brain is hardwiring, because there's a certain amount of valor in the difficulty, because we celebrate the survivor and we don't always talk about the thriver, we stop our story at the trauma point. We stop our story at the PTSD instead of moving forward and looking at, okay, what happened after, right? What happened after? I could sit here and I could tell you I am a breast cancer survivor, but that ends my story where at the point where my body was done dealing with cancer, right? But that's not where my story ended. Or I could tell you I got divorced, right? And I could end my story at the divorce, which I did for a lot of years, and it made me pretty darn bitter. I was not a particularly attractive person in that place and space because I was very bitter. And if I stop the story there and I talk about the bitterness of what happened to me and what men do to women in divorces and right? If I went there, then I would miss the redemption arc where I got to have my fifth child, my littlest projector, who's now 16. I wouldn't have met my new husband. He's not new anymore. We've been together for 20 years. I wouldn't have had all of the other experiences that I've had, and those would be ruled, that would be discounted in my story. Right? We have to pay attention when we're looking at this energy. We have to pay attention to where have we stopped our story and where have we taken the events that have triggered fear and or trauma in us and stopped the story and identified with the middle of the story instead of the end. This is so important in your creative power, as a source of your creative power, to really get honest with yourself this entire month of October around where did you end your story? Did you end your story in the middle with the traumatic event? And did you define yourself as a survivor? Or do you end your story? Have you internalized an identity where you are now a thriver, where you've gone through the redemption arc, the post-traumatic growth, right? That is so much a part of your evolved identity. The sustainability of the ends is dependent on the integrity of the means. You should write that down, because really what I'm saying here is that whatever we end up creating with our lives is going to be as sustainable as the means from which we created it. And when I'm talking about means, I'm really talking about your story. If you're telling a story that is less than who you really are, if you're telling a story of being a survivor, somebody who just lived, versus a thriver, somebody who used that catalytic event, whatever it might have been, as fertile soil for your growth and expansion, and you have used these opportunities of disruption to strengthen your story, make it more authentic. When your story is in integrity with your authentic identity, then what you build, what you manifest, becomes sustainable. You start stepping out of some of these boom and bust cycles that many of us are stuck in. I think this information is so important that I'm actually going to do a free masterclass series on this Thursday at noon Central Time. The title of the masterclass is Rewrite the Story That's Writing You. And we're going to go deep into some experiential learning around how your story is impacting your health, your body, how you eat, your money, your relationships. Everything you're creating is dependent on that story. And so Teresa will post the registration link below, but on Thursday, this is a 90-minute experiential program. It's not just me talking. I'm actually going to walk you through some exercises, because this is the month to do it. This is the month to dive deep in here and look at, where are your triggers? Where is your fear? Where are you holding yourself back from fully self-actualizing the true story of who you really are? That's really the big theme for October. It's really the big theme for October. We are balancing out fear versus faith. And for this week, the way in which we ground ourselves in courage is we reconnect this week with our higher purpose. This week, for us to be able to figure out how to navigate through the fear of inadequacy, which is up for us from Monday until Wednesday, and the fear of the future, which is really up for, I think, a lot of us right now. Gosh, just open up and just go anywhere. It's pretty unbelievable what's happening in our country right now, in America, and even in the world. And for us to be able to navigate forward with confidence, with a connection to our intuition, so that we know what to do when things feel so seemingly unknowable. One of the things that grounds us is a connection to our purpose, our connection to our higher purpose. Why are you here? Why are you here? That becomes the roots through which we can dig down deep and stand steady in a sea of uncertainty. That's where we ground ourselves, in our purpose. And so certainly this week, the earth is inviting us to look at, what is your higher purpose? Why are you here? Do you have the clarity, the will, the integrity, the self-worth to be able to root yourself deep down in that higher purpose, so that you can hear clearly? This is the intuition of the spleen. This is what the sun is teaching us, so that you can hear clearly, what's the next right step? What do I need to be doing in this time when things feel so wildly uncertain? By the end of this week, on Wednesday, when the sun hits a 57, we are really tapping into that deep intuitive knowingness. But if we don't understand what our purpose is, if we're not connected to source, that knowingness becomes a fear of the future, and it can be paralyzing. So there's a difference between a fear of the future and knowing what's the next right step, and the next right step, and the next right step. And certainly the earth this week is reminding us, we can stay connected to our own inner knowing, to our wisdom, to who we are, when we are grounded in a higher purpose, when we are remembering that this is so important, that you are a once-in-a-lifetime cosmic event. And you are an integral part of the cosmic plan. Literally, the entire universe is what it is because you're in it. And this is the week to remember that, to stand in that, and to know that because you are such an integral part of the cosmic plan, you're important, you're worthy, you deserve to be safe, to be strong, to be dialed in, tuned in, to be clear, to be connected. And so another call this week is for us to really dig in and look at what needs to heal in our own self-worth. What old stories do we need to cast aside? Where do we need to really focus on post-traumatic growth versus reacting and crawling back into old patterns that come from post-traumatic stress? So kind of a big curriculum for this week, but certainly a big curriculum also for this entire month, right? So really a month of sitting and grounding yourself in your higher purpose, sitting and holding. It's kind of an interesting thing, right? We have to sort of hold two things at the same time. We're kind of holding destruction in one hand and creation in the next. And we have to navigate between these two polarized experiences. Things are falling apart. Things are just being dismantled at a very extraordinarily fast pace. And it's leaving us in this place where we're either going to be in limbo and paralyzed. That's the spleen. That's the spleen energy that's getting triggered this month. Or we're going to dig deep in our purpose and say, okay, what do I want? It's that question I ask you guys to ask yourselves every darn week, right? What do you want? What do you want? And you can't answer that question honestly if the story you tell yourself and the world about who you are and how you are isn't deeply rooted in the truth of who you are. Because if you're not rooted in that truth, everything you're going to be creating is going to be reactive. The end of what you're creating isn't going to be sustained by the means, because reactivity, when we're creating from reactivity, that's that splenic fear response. When we let that splenic fear response run the show, we're not being intentional, we're not being deliberate, we're not being clear, we're just reacting, meaning we're acting out the same pattern again and again and again. And so this week, I really want you to look at deeply, where are you at with your story around money, support, relationships, purpose, creative fulfillment, the reason why you're here, your relationships, your body, your health, your wellness. What stories are you telling? And are those stories the true story of who you are? Or are you still telling a story that you stopped in the middle of the chapter, that you stopped at the trauma, and you took that trauma and you internalized it as part of your identity, instead of allowing yourself to go through the growth arc, the redemption arc of what happened next? What happened after? How did that experience become an event that catalyzed your growth? How did that experience become a place where you learned something essential that supports you in being the fulfillment of who you really are? Big questions this week. And honestly, usually I leave you with a little bit of a longer message, but I don't want to leave you with much more than that. I want you to look at fear. Get eyeball to eyeball with the fears you're experiencing in your life. Get into that bathroom mirror this week and just look at yourself and ask yourself, what am I creating? What am I building? Am I actually moving towards where I want to be going? Where do I have a perception of being stuck or trapped or out of, being incapable of moving forward? Where am I not allowing myself to self-actualize? Here's the last thing I want to leave you with. Maslow, when Maslow, who created Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when he got a little bit older before he died, he added another layer to his pyramid. He ended in the beginning with his work. He said, basically, he laid out these layers in this pyramid, and he said, people can't self-actualize, meaning they can't fulfill their potential if they don't have their basic needs met. If they don't feel safe, if they don't have shelter, if they don't have food, if they don't have security, it's really hard for people to fulfill their potential. I think that's true, right? At the end of his life, he said, self-actualization is not the top of the pyramid. There's one more level, and that's self-transcendence. That's that place where you turn around and you're not only fulfilling your potential, you've done that. Now you use your potential. You use that fulfillment to turn around and lift others up. I believe that at this point in time on our planets, we need people who are capable of self-transcendence more than anything in the world. We can't get there if we're still living out old patterns, if we're still reacting as if we're not safe, if we're still reacting as if it's not okay or valuable or precious for us to be who we are. You are a once-in-a-lifetime cosmic event. The world needs you to be who you are, for you to step into the fulfillment of that potential, and then to go one step further so that you can use that fulfillment as a way to leverage the path for others, so that we're all rising together. That's it. That's what I've got for you this week. Work on your fear. Work on your fear. You deserve better than to paralyze yourself in an old story. So really examine, what do you need to do to liberate yourself, to unshackle yourself from those old narratives so you can step into the full potential of the person you were born to be. Have a really great week. Take good care of yourselves. Be well. Bye.